Welcome to Fantasy Audiobook. Villain. My junior sisters are all black empresses. Chapter 21. In front of Chunyuan Hall, the bell rang. After finishing the morning practice, the elder left first. The tense atmosphere in the hall relaxed slightly. Many disciples gathered in the back. Many people raised their heads and looked at the two beautiful figures in the first row who were still kneeling on the ground packing their things. After Mu Qingyan cleared the table, she looked at Feng Qingling beside her, as if she were cherishing some treasure. She put away the spirit pattern pen that Su Ming gave her and held it against her chest. She snorted coldly in her heart and said faintly, "You haven't even really opened your spiritual veins. Even if you learn the method of absorbing spirits, what's the use? Also, there are strict rules in our Kaifeng cultivation. If you are master knowing your existence, even senior brother will be punished." Feng Qingling turned her head and glanced at Mu Qingyan. She didn't know why, but she always felt that this person had inexplicable hostility towards her. This made her feel very strange, and she didn't know her. Then she thought of Su Ming's instructions, telling her to go out to find him immediately after finishing her studies. She was not allowed to strike up random conversations with others, and she was not allowed to have contact with unfamiliar senior brothers and sisters. Feng Qingling withdrew her gaze and ignored Mu Qingyan. She cleared the table and quickly stood up. Under the watchful eyes of many senior brothers and sisters, she walked obediently out of the hall. Mu Qingyan looked at Feng Qingling's fragile and vulnerable figure. Her pretty face was calm and her eyes were indifferent. After packing her things, she left directly with her. Out of the hall, Feng Qingling turned around, frowned slightly, and said warily, "Why are you following me?" The words fell. Mu Qingyan's bright eyes glanced directly at her, looking at the path outside the hall. On the trail, a figure was leaning against the tree trunk, with a bored look on his face. A pair of black eyes just happened to be raised, looking towards them quietly. Seeing him, Mu Qingyan's eyes became infatuated unconsciously, and the look on her pretty face became slightly nervous. And just for a moment she was stunned. Feng Qingling had already trotted up, with curved eyebrows on her beautiful little face. She held the spirit pattern pen in her hands and placed it in front of her chest. She walked up to Su Ming and called him sweetly, "Senior brother." Su Ming smiled slightly and stared at Feng Qingling with interest. Although the little girl is still young and has a petite figure, she has a slender and soft body, her skin is as white and tender as snow, and her black hair is lightly bunched. She wears simple training clothes, but she outlines her graceful curves. Her facial features are also extremely delicate, and there is a trace of innocence in her. A touch of charm, almost like a seductive little fairy. Especially when she looked at him, her moist eyes were extremely clear and watery, and so clean that it seemed to make people want to cover her. But Su Ming also knew that in the depths of these clear and clean eyes, the pain and shadows of her past were concealed. Perhaps one day in the future, when these pains and shadows could no longer be suppressed, Feng Qingling would become someone else. "You scream so sweetly." Su Ming touched her little head, and when the crowd of disciples behind him had dumbfounded expressions, he smiled nonchalantly and said, "Brother, please come listen and see if there are any so sweet." Hearing Su Ming's words, Feng Qingling's face suddenly turned red, and a blush appeared on her face. Her heart pounded, and she lowered her head, not daring to look at Su Ming anymore, feeling extremely shy. Su Ming looked at her rosy cheeks. She was cute, beautiful, and very attractive, but he couldn't understand why this little girl was shy. He shook his head and said, "I'm just teasing you. Are you hungry?" "No." Feng Qingling shook her head. "Whatever senior brother wants to eat, Linger can go back and cook it for you." Su Ming thought, "How about we discuss something?" "Yes." Feng Qingling nodded without thinking. As long as Su Ming said it, she would agree. Su Ming's eyes narrowed. "Aren't you afraid that I'll sell you if you agree so quickly?" Linger is not afraid. Silly girl. Su Ming smiled, let go of her little head with his hands, and instead put his arms around her shoulders. When Feng Qingling's pretty face turned rosy again, he took her away from here. "From now on, don't call me senior brother, you can call me brother, and I will treat you as my biological sister." Feng Qingling was stunned and her steps suddenly paused. "Brother, sister." She looked at Su Ming blankly, and the shyness and joy she felt because of Su Ming's intimate behavior towards her just now seemed to be poured down by a basin of cold water. Su Ming curled his finger and tapped her on the small forehead. Why are you so dazed? Do you think I am your brother and you are embarrassing a little girl like you? All his affectionate behavior towards Feng Qingling now is just to treat this little girl like a younger sister. What Su Ming wants is to recognize Feng Qingling as his sister, teach her to practice, and give her the best training resources. When she grows up in the future, she will at least be an emperor, and can compete with the empresses in the god realm for dominance. At that time, it was impossible for this girl to turn against his brother. Feng Qingling was silent. She lowered her head and said nothing. I feel a little sad. Could it be that, from the beginning, I treated her well and just treated her as my sister? But what she wants now is not his sister. Senior brother. Su Ming frowned. You still call me senior brother? Feng Qingling gritted her teeth. Her usually weak eyes were staring at him stubbornly at this moment. Master once said that Ling'er is not allowed to recognize her brother outside. If Master finds out, she will beat Ling'er to death. Sons. Su Ming. This excuse is too false. If you don't want to admit it, just admit it. He didn't expect Feng Qingling to be so resistant to this matter. In his heart, he just regarded her as a little girl who hasn't grown up. He didn't think about certain aspects at all. Seeing her resistance, he just started changing the subject. Since your master has said so, I won't force you. How are the injuries on your body? Does it still hurt? Feng Qingling shook her head obediently. It doesn't hurt anymore. Under the tiny sunlight, a gentle breeze blew up, raising a strand of black hair on her forehead. When Su Ming turned his head and looked over, he discovered that there was an ancient mystery hidden between her white eyebrows. The pattern slowly emerged. Su Ming was stunned for a moment. Her eyes were fixed on the ancient pattern on his forehead. The next moment, her eyes seemed to be pulled into an ancient and mysterious dark space. Above this space, the first thing that caught her eye was a woman in a green skirt, who looked like a fairy. The shadow of a stunningly beautiful woman. This woman's black hair was like a waterfall, and her eyes were like stars. She stood there so quietly, but it seemed to make the whole world eclipse her. There was an unparalleled ethereal aura on her body, and in this ethereal place, and inadvertently revealed a look of disdain for the world. Su Ming was in a daze for a moment. The scene in front of him suddenly changed, and Feng Qingling's little face appeared in his eyes again, as well as the ancient mark that gradually disappeared on her forehead. Su Ming hurriedly reached out and touched her eyebrows. Feng Qingling nervously grasped the corners of his clothes. System, that mark just now. Ding, that is the mark of the Nine Heavens' mysterious Empress. The heroine Feng Qingling has the blood of the Nine Heavens' mysterious Empress. She is also the future Nine Heavens goddess. After she is enthroned as the emperor, she will be the Nine Heavens Empress. Su Ming let out a breath. The Nine Heavens Zon Empress was the domineering empress who truly ruled the world tens of thousands of years ago. She was as famous as the legendary immortal God King, Abyss Void Emperor, Tianxi Ghost Emperor and other figures. In his first 5 lives, to put it bluntly, every time he died, he never saw the scene where these female protagonists became empresses, because he was basically killed by the protagonist in the early and middle stages of the plot. According to the system, in the future, these female protagonists will all become victims on the male protagonist's path to enlightenment. Therefore, Feng Qingling's plot is that on the day she becomes emperor, she is killed by the male protagonist in order to obtain the emperor's heart in order to prove the great path. Su Ming couldn't help but want to complain. I don't know who wrote this fantasy novel world. The early plot was all about Qing Shui. The male protagonist only flirted with the female protagonist, but because of his pure yang constitution, he never even touched the female protagonist's hand. Of course, this was not what Su Ming was complaining about. What he was complaining about was the subsequent plot. All the female protagonists died at the hands of the male protagonist. I don't know if the brainless author messed it up in the later stage. It was simply outrageous. After coming back to his senses, Su Ming lifted a strand of black hair from Feng Qingling's forehead. Looking at the little girl's nervous expression, he smiled faintly and asked, "What did you feel just now?" Ah, Feng Qingling's pretty face instantly turned red, and she didn't dare to look at Su Ming. She turned her head, blushing with embarrassment, and murmured in response, "It's a little itchy." Su Ming, what kind of understanding does this girl have? But that's right, She may not have known that the ancient mark would appear on her forehead, and thought she was asking when she was touching her eyebrows. Still itchy. This girl is really brave enough to say it. He reached out and pinched Feng Qingling's fair little face. How do you feel now? A little pain. Su Ming couldn't help but smile. How long until you reach adulthood? Feng Qingling thought for a while. With a deep sense of expectation in her heart, she raised her head and stared into Su Ming's eyes, and said crisply, there is still 1 year left. 1 year. Su Ming nodded. In other words, in 1 year, the mark of the 9 Heavens Mystic Queen on her forehead will be completely awakened. At that time, it will be the time for her to accept the inheritance of the mysterious queen. Feng Qingling obviously misunderstood his question. Her originally dim eyes became slightly brighter at this moment. She thought that Su Ming disliked her for being young, so he wanted to recognize her as his sister. But 1 year later, she will become an adult. At that time, she will no longer be young. Su Ming put his arm around Feng Qingling's shoulders and led her away from here as if there was no one else around. The little girl not only showed no resistance at all on her pretty face, but also looked shy and flushed, and followed him away obediently. Just like a well-behaved and obedient little daughter-in-law. Along the way, I don't know how many disciples in Kaifeng were shocked. These disciples were shocked when they saw Su Ming and Feng Qingling's intimate look, and Feng Qingling's obedient expression. They thought she was a little girl that their senior brother had tricked from somewhere. At that moment, many disciples felt a little unbalanced. Several of them snorted softly, turned around and ran away towards the main peak hall, looking for Bai Qing to announce Su Ming's condition. They can't let the eldest brother harm the little girl. Otherwise, if the girl's elders come to visit, it will be their Kaifeng who will be embarrassed. Maybe the master will be punished by the sect. This eldest brother is too. Junior sister Mu, do you want to go to Lingshan Hall? We can go together. In front of Chunyuan Hall, a female disciple looked at Mu Qingyan who was standing aside and kindly stepped forward to call her. Mu Qingyan didn't seem to hear her voice, and her eyes just stared blankly at the place where Su Ming and Feng Qingling left. At this moment, her heart suddenly seemed to be stabbed hard by something, and her heart ached unbearably. Thinking of Su Ming's cold eyes and the completely different attitudes towards Feng Qingling and herself, her eyes unable to live up to expectations, he turned red. Elder brother, you were not like this before. She murmured. At this moment, how she wished that her senior brother would still come to pester her every day and come to her every day as before. She only blamed herself for not discovering how good her senior brother was to her earlier. Reply to senior brother. All of these, she only has herself to blame. Junior sister Mu. The female disciple lightly patted Mu Qingyan's shoulder, but when she looked over, she saw Mu Qingyan slowly raising her head, glancing at her with cold eyes, and then turned around and left. Wherever she passed, the temperature of the air seemed to drop a lot. The female disciple was also stunned for a moment. What happened to junior sister Mu today? I've noticed something wrong with her since the morning. Is it because of senior brother again? But today, senior brother didn't harass her either. Another female disciple came over and curled her lips and said, maybe it was because I saw senior brother that I thought of the incident 3 months ago. Alas, senior brother brought a little girl over from somewhere today. She was if you know about it, you will probably punish him again. Isn't that what he deserves? Junior sister Mu used to have such a lively temper, but he ruined her life like this. I feel that master's punishment for him is too light. Several female disciples gathered around, stared at Su Ming's leaving figure, and condemned him angrily. And this time, on the path next to it, several disciples suddenly ran towards them, their faces flushed. As they ran, they yelled at the 7 peak disciples with shock on their faces. Have someone tell master, there is news from the mountain behind the main peak. That red-fronted wolf with Guiyuan realm cultivation that no one could successfully contract was frightened by our Kaifeng senior brother's sword. The disciples from other peaks have seen it with their own eyes. Elder brother, he is able to control spirits from afar, and his methods are extraordinary. This is the state of nirvana. Senior brother, he has entered the nirvana realm. He is the first among all the young disciples of our Shenyan sect to enter the nirvana realm. In the sect competition, our 7 peaks will definitely win the first place. The news spread among all the disciples instantly. For a time, countless people's hearts were shaken. Mu Qingyan, who had not yet walked far, turned her back to everyone, but the corner of her mouth curled up with a cold smile, and she sneered in her heart, "What do you guys know? The Nirvana realm is just the tip of the iceberg for senior brother." As for the female disciples who just criticized Su Ming, their pretty faces suddenly changed, and their hearts trembled. If they remember correctly, senior brother, he seems not to be 20 years old this year. Even a 20-year-old Nirvana realm expert is a monster-like existence in the entire northern wilderness. Senior brother, you gave me your room, and there is no place to sleep at night, otherwise. How about I kick you out and you give me your room back? Feng Qingling puffed her lips softly and looked at Su Ming in front of her. She felt a little depressed. Bad senior brother, doesn't he understand what he means? He doesn't even understand this kind of thing, Master once told her that the relationship between a man and a woman is the most intimate when they sleep together. Su Ming thought carefully about it. Then he murmured to himself, the rules of heaven, in the final analysis, may be just a manifestation of the will of the strong and are not unbreakable. So this time, will the junior sisters and the others betray themselves for the male protagonist? Quote, "Forget it, what bullshit rules of heaven? I don't believe in heaven in my life. I dare to issue my judgment order in the divine realm. A bunch of people are looking for death. So what about the gods? From now on, I will have millions of Shira generals under my command. Whoever disobeys them." Su Ming touched his chin. When the two of them were about to reach Kaifeng Lingshan Hall, there were many disciples on the surrounding roads secretly looking at him and Feng Qingling. Their eyes were complicated and shocking. Being watched by so many people, Feng Qingling became nervous and hurriedly grabbed the corner of Su Ming's clothes. Su Ming looked back at her. The little girl blushed and did not dare to look at him. Taking in her lovely appearance, Su Ming felt that this girl's character was a bit too soft. She had been abused by Hong Yu before and had not learned to resist. He wondered if she could regain her reputation as the Nine Heavens' mysterious queen in the future world. Looking at the soft and bully look now, it is probably quite embarrassing. Buzz. They were about to arrive at the Lingshan Hall, but a powerful spiritual power quietly swept towards the two of them, and finally turned into a spiritual barrier, trapping him and Feng Qingling inside. Lord Sect Master. Many disciples of Kaifeng were shocked when they saw the old figure suddenly coming from the end of the path. They hurriedly knelt down and saluted the sect leader. Du Kanghai put his hands behind his back and walked not far away from Su Ming and Feng Qingling. He first stared at Su Ming with his burning eyes, and then glanced at Feng Qingling. "Nirvana realm, you kid can really hide it." He smiled slightly and ordered directly to Su Ming, "From now on, when you leave the Seven Peaks, you only need to come to my main peak to practice. I still lack a direct disciple." He also found it unbelievable. He knew that Su Ming had some talent in cultivation, but he didn't expect that he would advance to Nirvana so quickly. You must know that when he and Su Ming were the same age, they had only half-stepped into Nirvana. It took several years before he successfully advanced to Nirvana. How could such a genius monster take advantage of that woman Bai Qingshan? Anyway, no matter where he is a disciple of the Shenyang sect. Instead of doing this, it is better to let him come under her and teach her personally. Du Kanghai's words undoubtedly confirmed the rumors about Su Ming. At that moment, all the disciples around him were extremely shocked and turned their attention to Su Ming. Su Ming, who was imprisoned by Du Kanghai using a spiritual barrier, had a relaxed look on his face at this time. He glanced at the old guy lightly and said, "Sect leader Du, I am a disciple of the seventh peak. If I go to the main peak without permission, wouldn't I break the rules? In Shenyang sect, I am the rule. I will inform your master, and from now on, she will no longer be your master." Su Ming shook his head and smiled. The old guy is really confident. Du Kanghai narrowed his eyes, glanced at Feng Qingling behind Su Ming, and said indifferently, "Hong Yu once said when she entered the sect that her disciple has an evil cultivator's constitution. The conditions for my allowing her to enter the sect are one of them is not allowing her disciples to practice in our Shenyang sect. Otherwise, once caught by me, I will destroy her disciple's spiritual veins, drive him into prisoner's peak, and make him a slave for the rest of his life." As soon as she finished speaking, Feng Qingling's face turned extremely pale, her hands tightly grabbed Su Ming's clothes, and her body unconsciously hid behind him. Du Kanghai raised the corner of his mouth and spoke loudly, "Our God Yan sect has been a righteous sect for hundreds of years. How can we tarnish the sect's reputation because of this person? Su Ming, I am interested in your talent. It's your honor, but you colluded with evil cultivators. If you don't hand her over, don't blame me for not giving you face. Du Kanghai's words. It was already a blatant threat. When the disciples on the side heard the word, evil cultivator, their eyes towards Feng Qingling changed instantly. Countless disciples' eyes filled with deep disgust, and some bold ones hurriedly said angrily, Sir, sect leader, this woman has nothing to do with our Kaifeng. She was brought back by our senior brother. An evil cultivator brings trouble to the world, and everyone should be punished for it. How can our sect tolerate her existence? We also ask the sect leader to take action to clean up the sect. All the disciples suddenly shared the same hatred. The disgusted look of anger and condemnation suddenly made all the grievances and pain in Feng Qingling's eyes well up. Her eyes turned red and she hid behind Su Ming, not daring at all. Go see those people. This moment, Feng Qingling's heart was trembling. She didn't care at all what other people thought of her. But the Su Ming in front of her was almost the last person she could rely on in her dark life. If Su Ming was also like those people, I also dislike her. The corners of her eyes became crystal clear and moist, and she held on to Su Ming's clothes tightly, fearing that the senior brother would throw her away and hand her over to the people opposite. Su Ming could feel the tension and fear in Feng Qingling's heart. He glanced around and saw that almost all the disciples, after hearing Du Kanghai say that Feng Qingling had an evil cultivator's constitution, had classified this little girl into on the contrary. I am afraid that in the future, even if Feng Qingling can stay, she will be looked down upon by all the disciples of the sect. That woman Hong Yu is really cruel, which is equivalent to harming Feng Qingling for the rest of her life. I sighed in my heart. He stretched out his hand to hold Feng Qingling's little hand, and gently took off the hand she was holding on to her clothes. Feng Qingling's already moist eyes suddenly shed tears of grievance. She looked at Su Ming blankly, and her heart felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave at this moment. Su Ming felt baffled and reached out to wipe away the tears from the corners of her eyes. Why are you crying? It's okay if I don't say it, but when I mention it, there are more tears in Feng Qingling's eyes. She choked in a low voice. Don't want me anymore? Su Ming. That being said, why do you feel like he looks like a scumbag? He pinched her cheek angrily and said, don't cry. Feng Qingling sniffed, feeling uncomfortable and aggrieved. Su Ming rubbed her little head in a funny way. I didn't realize that she's such a crybaby. Feng Qingling gritted her teeth stubbornly. In front of Hong Yu, she rarely cried no matter how abused she was. But here with Su Ming, she didn't know why, she just felt wronged and couldn't help but want to cry. Su Ming also didn't expect that Feng Qingling would be so fragile in front of him. Moreover, the red eyes are a bit cute and heartbreaking. Silly, he joked, gently caressing her tender and pretty face. Feng Qingling was startled for a moment, then she raised her head and looked at Su Ming. Su Ming still had a gentle smile on his face and wiped away the tears from the corners of her eyes. Then he rubbed her head and turned to look at Du Kanghai opposite. From Su Ming's eyes, Feng Qingling did not see the same dislike as those of other disciples, but instead was full of heartache for her. This made something extremely soft in her heart be severely touched, and there was only a flash of emotion in her eyes. His figure was left, and nothing else. Opposite, Du Kanghai put his hands behind his back and stared at Su Ming calmly. I can give you a chance to send Hong Yu's disciple back to her, and then follow me to the main peak to report. From now on, you will be senior brother Zongfang, my direct disciple. I, the Shenyang sect's library, will come and go as you please. There will be inexhaustible monthly spiritual stones, and you will be able to choose any of the martial arts and spiritual secrets. His eyes were blazing. With Su Ming's talent, even though he was also a disciple of the Shenyang sect when he stayed at Kaifeng, he did not teach him personally after all. There would inevitably be gaps between him and the sect in the future. Besides, he had given Su Ming such a great opportunity, and he expected Su Ming to grow up in the future, hit the list of geniuses in the Northern Spirit Realm, and bring glory to the sect. The Bailing Prodigy list collects almost all the top prodigies over the age of 20 and under 30 in the 4 major regions of the Bailing Realm. Only the top 100 with the strongest talent and cultivation will have the chance to be on the list, and everyone on the list, one of them is a monster-like existence, and the one with the lowest cultivation level is also in the spiritual realm. Even though Su Ming has now entered the Nirvana realm, there is still a big gap between him and the top geniuses outside the northern wilderness who have been practicing for longer. Du Kanghai took a fancy to his talent, so he showed shame. An important figure in the peak, Su Ming in the future, might even be able to reach the top 100 on the bailing talent list for their Shenyan sect. Once on the list, it is a great honor for a sect. As far as he knew, among the 4 major regions in the northern spiritual realm, their northern wilderness region was almost at the bottom. No one from the Nuo Da region could make the list, which also made the other 3 regions a lot of jokes. And he, Du Kanghai, is an ambitious man. Su Ming's talent gave him a glimmer of hope. Unfortunately, what he didn't know was that the Su Ming in front of him might reveal just a little bit of his hidden cards, which would be enough to make him kneel down with fear and trembling, and those things he promised to Su Ming were nothing in the latter's eyes. Seeing that Su Ming didn't speak, Du Kanghai thought he was still thinking about it, so he smiled lightly and said, "Those things you did in the past will be forgotten by me from now on." Su Ming shook his head and raised his palm. "Give it a gentle squeeze." Buzz. The space around him slowly solidified, and the space barrier that Du Kanghai had condensed shattered in the next second. Du Kanghai's eyes changed. It is really the Nirvana realm. It can break the space barrier I created casually. It seems that I am about to enter the middle stage of the Nirvana realm. His eyes suddenly became hot. "Su Ming, your talent should not be buried in the 7 peaks. Under my command, from now on, my position will be yours, and you will also have a place on the list of geniuses in the northern spirit realm. Bai Qingshan, she can't teach you." Hear the words. The disciples around him were shocked. Su Ming sneered softly, "Old guy, the layout is too small. If he wanted to be on the northern spirit realm talent list, 1 person would be enough to suppress everyone on the list." However, what he wanted now was not just this list of geniuses. What he wanted was the entire northern spirit realm. The northern wilderness territory cannot even enter his eyes. If he hadn't been worried that the 10,000-year-old monster hidden in the immortal clan Holy Land in Bailing Realm would notice him in advance and needed the cover of being a disciple of the Shenyan sect, he would have crushed the old guy Du Kanghai to death with 1 palm. But the hero is about to go up the mountain, and the old guy's death is not far away. Today, let's collect some interest. With a smile on his face, Su Ming flicked his finger. An extremely obscure ray of spiritual power shot into the void. Buzz. Time. In the originally cloudless sky, dark thunderclouds rolled in, and an extremely huge vortex of spiritual power suddenly condensed out. In the whirlpool filled with violent thunder, several extremely terrifying spiritual pressures slowly spread out from it. Du Kanghai's face was startled, and all the disciples around him were stunned for a moment, and then they all looked nervous as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Controlling the power of space is a powerful method that can only be controlled by those at the spirit master level or above. And they had no idea why such a large space vortex suddenly appeared in the sky. The aura coming from the vortex was so terrifying that all of them couldn't help but want to kneel down. No one thought that powerful spiritual masters from other forces would suddenly come to their Shenyan sect at this time. Du Kanghai looked solemn. Within the entire Shenyan sect, a stream of light filled with powerful aura flew past from the top of each peak, and finally stayed in midair, looking at the sky with a complex expression. From the 1st peak to the 9th peak, the peak masters of each peak arrived, and dozens of elders also appeared together. Even the great elder who had reached the spiritual realm like Du Kanghai also appeared quietly. Next to Du Kanghai, the old face was even more solemn. The peak masters of each peak of Shenyan sect are all at the peak of Nirvana realm, and the other dozens of elders are mostly at the early or middle stage of Nirvana realm. But now, Hongyu has also been promoted to the spirit master. Appearing, her charming figure instantly attracted the attention of many elders and disciples. Even Elder Hongyu is here. The great elder in white robe glanced at Hongyu in midair and said meaningfully. Hongyu pouted, her pretty face was unparalleled, and she said calmly, "We are also elders of the sect. When the sect may be threatened, it should be normal for me to come here." Du Kanghai waved his hand to interrupt them. He had no time to care about Su Ming's affairs at this time. He floated up and stood in front of many peak masters and elders. He raised his eyes and stared into the air and said coldly, "I don't know who the powerful person came to our Shenyan sect. If there is any offense against this sect leader, I hope you will make it clear." The space is silent. Du Kanghai's face looked a little unhappy. Among the many peak masters, Bai Qingshan was the first to glance at Su Ming below. Seeing that Su Ming still looked lazy and leisurely, she suddenly became angry. This guy actually got involved with someone like Hong Yu behind her back. Didn't he know that Hong Yu's disciple was born with a body of evil cultivators? If he wanted to practice, he would eventually embark on the path of evil cultivation, which would harm him his whole life. Bai Qingshan was furious. Although the things Su Ming did made her extremely disappointed, no matter what, he was the disciple that she devoted all her efforts to raising. Although she raised him with a purpose that she was ashamed to express, but now, she couldn't just watch Su Ming be destroyed like this. But the next second, Bai Qingshan was slightly stunned. Below, Su Ming also sensed her gaze, and the corners of his mouth curved. He sat down under the willow tree with a lazy look on his face, leaning against the big tree. He reached out and plucked a weed nearby, held it in his mouth, then looked at Feng Qingling with a smile, and waved to the little girl. Feng Qingling came to him abruptly. Su Ming raised his head. Because Feng Qingling was wearing a training uniform today, with a white shirt on top and a skirt on the bottom, when she looked up, she saw two slender white jade legs, as smooth as jade, which made people unable to resist. I have the urge to touch it. Senior brother. Feng Qingling also noticed Su Ming's gaze, and her cheeks immediately turned red. Su Ming had an evil smile on his lips, resting his hands on the back of his head, and glanced at the charming little face in front of him. Xiaoling senior brother is a little tired, come here and beat your legs. Feng Qingling's face turned even redder, and she hesitated and said, but senior brother, sect leader and master. Su Ming narrowed his eyes and said, be obedient. Feng Qingling nodded obediently, then knelt down on the grass next to Su Ming. From the moment Su Ming blocked the master's whip for her, she knew that her senior brother was far more powerful than she imagined. A person like that would listen to what he said, so whenever she stayed by Su Ming's side, she would feel more at ease than ever before. Two fair and delicate jade hands were gently placed on Su Ming's thighs, kneading them tenderly for him. A tingling feeling surged through her heart, making her pretty face turn red instantly. The disciples around were stunned. Almost everyone who saw this scene had a look on their face. This guy is so infuriating. A mysterious powerful man has arrived. When the sect is facing a huge crisis, Su Ming, the senior brother, can still talk about love with the little beauty next to him with a lazy and comfortable look. This. Simply outrageous. Many disciples had anger in their eyes, but they were helpless. Bai Qingshan's beautiful eyes glazed over for a moment, and she took a deep breath as she looked at Feng Qingling's frail and delicate appearance, and how obedient the little girl was in front of Su Ming. At this moment, a faint sadness emerged from the depths of her heart. She had experienced this feeling before. She also felt the same sadness and discomfort when she heard that Su Ming bullied Mu Qingyan. Bai Qingshan is not a woman who doesn't understand anything. She knew what this meant and why she was like this. She also knew that Su Ming only regarded her as his master from the beginning. He liked girls like Mu Qingyan and Feng Qingling, not an old woman like her who is who knows how many years older than him. So, her attitude towards Su Ming during this period was so cold and ruthless because she didn't want to see Su Ming smiling gently at her every day, which would make her unable to bear it, so she deliberately alienated him. Deliberately indifferent to him. Maybe she didn't know that when she punished Su Ming, she felt more distress than anyone else, but she had to pretend to be indifferent. Because she is his master. Bai Qingshuanyu squeezed her hand gently and silently looked away. At this moment, on the sky, thunder clouds surged, and in the extremely shocked eyes of all the elders and peak masters, they saw a white sword light, as if carrying a huge white dragon shadow, rushing down from the whirlpool in the sky. Clang! The sword light passed by like lightning. And the huge main peak of Shenyan sect that towered into the sky was actually cut into two neatly and smoothly right from the top of the peak at this moment. Everyone fell silent. Du Kanghai's old face turned livid. He suddenly raised his eyes and saw that the thunderclouds in the sky had dissipated a little, and he saw three figures, like gods, slowly descending under the violent black thunder. It was two men and one woman. The woman is in the front, wearing a snow-white dress, with long silver hair hanging on her shoulders. Her eyes are cold and unearthly. Behind her, she also carries a snow-white long sword. This is an extremely beautiful woman, Her whole body is filled with a cold and holy aura, which makes people feel amazing. Behind the woman, there were two young-looking men in black clothes with handsome faces, but with evil smiles on their faces, staring at them with deep black eyes. The auras of the three of them. It was so powerful that even Du Kanghai found it terrifying. Those are three powerful men at the pinnacle of the spiritual realm. No, that woman in the snow skirt may have become a half-step god emperor, and the aura on her body was even more powerful than the two men behind her. Du Kanghai was completely panicked. In their Shenyang sect, he himself is only at the middle stage of the spiritual sovereign realm. As for the Great Elder and Hong Yu, they are both at the early stage of the spiritual sovereign realm. It only takes one person to take action. Today, I am afraid that it will be enough to destroy the entire Shenyang sect. A deep chill surged from the bottom of his heart, and cold sweat began to break out on Du Kanghai's back. He hurriedly raised his hands towards the woman in the snow skirt in midair, and his tone was no longer as cold as before, but rather nervous. I'm here. Du Kanghai is the sect leader of the Shenyang sect. I don't know why these three great masters come to our Shenyang sect. What are they doing? The whole sky fell into silence. Half a minute later. On the sky, the man in black on the left curled his lips, and his evil eyes looked at all the nervous and frightened disciples of the sect below. Finally, his eyes paused and settled on the lazy figure under a willow tree. Boss is so happy. He brought us all the way from central China to see him and that little beauty show off their affection, right? He sent a message to the man on the right. Hear the words. The man on the right shrugged. A hero is saddened by beauty. It's rare to see the boss looking so leisurely. Don't forget how cruel and ruthless he was when he led us to annihilate the sect forces in central continent. It's so different from now. If two people. As he said that, the man glanced at the woman in the snow skirt in front of him. Sister Lang, what do you mean, boss? Destroy this sect, or kill all the people below. The pretty woman in the snow skirt has cold eyes, and the cold temperament on her body is a real coldness that prevents strangers from getting close to her. She is extremely beautiful and extremely cold. She said nothing, just her beautiful eyes quietly glanced down, and the figures of Su Ming and Feng Qingling were reflected in her pupils. When she saw the two people's intimate appearance, a faint wave passed through the depths of her eyes, and then she looked away. The jade hand raised slightly and held the hilt of the sword behind her with her backhand. Clang! The sword was unsheathed. The light flashed across the sky, and wherever it passed, even the void was cut into a deep crack. Poof! Blood sprayed into the sky. The next second, Du Kanghai's two arms were neatly broken off. One sword, two arms broken. Both the Peak Master and all the elders were deeply shocked by this sword, especially the Great Elder. His face turned extremely ugly in an instant, his body trembled, and he unconsciously took 2 steps back. A strong spiritual master, who can be said to be the top combat power of the sect, was cut off by that woman's sword with both arms. Even if he could find spiritual objects from heaven and earth to repair them in the future, he would still be a useless person. Not only will it be difficult to make progress throughout your life, but you will also begin to regress rapidly. It can be said that the top combat power of their Shenyang sect has been reduced by 30% from this moment on. Sect Master, all the elders exclaimed. Du Kanghai reacted from his daze. His face suddenly lost all color, and his eyes shone with deep disbelief and a hint of deep fear. The severe pain actually made him dizzy. Aha! The sword energy and the strong wind swept over. The sharp, snow-white sword tip rested at his throat. A sense of fear of death invaded his heart. Du Kanghai's face turned pale, and his blood surged in his body. At this moment, he truly felt the threat of death. After decades of traveling across the northern wasteland, today was the closest he came to death. He used his spiritual power to stop the blood flowing from the wound. He felt the indifferent eyes of the woman in the snow skirt in front of him, as if without any emotion, and hurriedly said in a trembling voice, "I don't know what I have offended, please." Expressly stated. In the face of such a strong man, Du Kanghai never thought of resisting desperately. On the contrary, he was a man who cherished his life. He knew that there was a huge disparity in strength. Resistance would only lead to death. Maybe even the Shenyang sect would be wiped out. Opposite, the woman in the snow skirt raised the tip of her sword and retracted her long sword. The sharp sword energy also drew a long blood mark on Du Kanghai's neck. Immediately, Her clear and indifferent sweet voice sounded in everyone's ears. Today, I will not kill you. Du Kanghai's face suddenly turned red. You and I have no enmity or enmity. Boom. Before he finished speaking, a black shadow appeared in front of him like a ghost. A punch containing violent spiritual power hit his face, knocking him down from midair and shooting hard into a mountain peak. Among them, the sky was filled with dust. The man in black on the right blew his fist and said, I told you I would spare your life, so why are you talking so much nonsense? With this punch, Du Kanghai's face was bruised and swollen, his face was dripping with blood, and his face even sunk a little. Subsequently, the man on the left glanced at the terrified Shenyan sect disciples below. He chuckled lightly and fixed his gaze on the great elder and Hong Yu. I'm sorry, I am so unreasonable in my work at Lingmen. He glanced sideways at the great elder and said, Old man, are you not convinced? The great elder's face was ashen. But my heart was greatly shocked. Spirit Gate. Could it be that the demonic cultivator sect that rose to prominence in the northern spirit realm's Zhongzhou territory not long ago? It is said that this Ling sect, one sect and 3 emperors, rose up in the Zhongzhou territory on the corpses of countless sect disciples. In just a few months, I don't know how many sects have been destroyed and how many lives have been slaughtered. And their sect leader, according to rumors, once fought a battle alone with the 3 ancestors of the god emperors of the Emerald Valley, the largest force in the central continent. In the end, even the 3 ancestors of the god emperors of the Emerald Valley, they tried all their means but could not do anything to him, and even allowed him to take away countless treasures in the valley and leave in style. After that battle, the reputation of Lingmen has really spread in the northern spirit realm. Even places like their northern wilderness region, which are millions of miles away from central continent, are aware of the existence of Lingmen. One can imagine how prosperous this reputation must be. Except for the 3 ancestors of the god emperor in the Emerald Valley, no one in the outside world has ever seen the true face of the Lingmen sect master. They only know that he is a cruel and murderous big devil. Most of the disciples of the Ling sect are ferocious and cruel people, but they are all amazingly talented people with monstrous talents that cannot be compared to ordinary people. It is said that a certain genius ranks in the top 50 on the Northern Spirit Realm genius list, were tortured to death by an unknown ordinary disciple in the Ling sect. That's just an ordinary disciple. If it were a core disciple, how powerful would it be? This moment, the great elder felt suffocated in his heart. When did their Shenyan sect offend the Ling sect? No one in the world today knows that Ling sect disciples are a group of cruel, ruthless, evil and terrifying existences. If you offend such a sect, you are not digging your own grave. Looking at Du Kanghai lying in the blood pit, the elder's eyelids jumped wildly. Could it be that the sect leader had offended the Lingmen disciples privately, which led to today's disaster? He didn't believe it. With Du Kanghai's temperament, he would never take the initiative to offend the Lingmen. What's more, the Lingmen was located in the central continent, which was extremely far away from here. Du Kanghai would only go so far when he was full, bringing such a terrifying enemy to the sect. At this moment, the ghost elder from the Taiden Palace on the main peak quietly appeared behind everyone. His eyes were still wrapped with cloth bands, his body was stooped, and Zhou Yaoyao was following him beside him. Zhou Yaoyao looked ahead at Du Kanghai, who was lying in a pit of blood, not knowing whether he was alive or dead. Her face was a little pale, and she trembled towards the ghost elder. Sect master, he. The ghost elder raised his hand and interrupted her, don't worry about irrelevant matters. Oh, Zhou Yaoyao nodded her head and suddenly saw Su Ming and Feng Qingling under the willow tree. She stared at Feng Qingling for a long time. At this time, the ghost elder said solemnly, you go to Su Ming first. If the sect encounters something unexpected today, only he can protect you. Zhou Yaoyao was stunned. The ghost elder continued, your talent is not weaker than anyone else. On the contrary, you have a spiritual physique that everyone is jealous of. Staying in Shenyan sect will only hinder your future path, and staying with senior brother Su by your side, he can give you the vastest world. Listening to Elder Ghost's commanding tone, Zhou Yaoyao was silent for a moment. She didn't know why, but after leaving Su Ming last night, the ghost elder's attitude towards her became very different. He even approached her directly and said that he would accept her as a disciple and teach her what he had learned throughout his life. Give it to her, which makes her a little confused. Only now do I know that in addition to her cultivation talent, it must be because of Senior Brother Su and the Ghost Elder's attitude towards her that changed. Zhou Yaoyao hesitated, but what, if I go there now, will it disturb Senior Brother Su? Her big, dark, watery eyes were staring at Su Ming in a rather strange way. Others were spending time there, you and me, and she, an outsider, suddenly came over. Isn't it appropriate? The Ghost Elder curled his lips. There are some things that you have to fight for, do you understand? Zhou Yaoyao was stunned. After realizing the meaning of Elder Ghost's words, she blushed and hurriedly explained, Palace Master, I only regard him as my senior brother, where did you think you were going? Real. Zhou Yaoyao nodded hurriedly, Senior Brother Su and I, it's impossible for us. The Ghost Elder sighed. He no longer spoke, nor did he force Zhou Yaoyao to find Su Ming. Instead, he raised his head and looked into the air with his eyes wrapped under the cloth belt. On the sky, the Great Elder stood in front of many peak masters and elders, with cold sweat on his forehead. He glanced at the pretty and calm Hongyu beside him, and his whole heart trembled when he thought of Du Kanghai's fate just now. His cultivation level is even a little worse than Du Kanghai's. Even Du Kanghai was killed by someone's sword in an understatement. If it had been him, he would have been killed directly. Elder Hongyu, what should we do? The Great Elder secretly transmitted the message. Hear the words. Hongyu rolled her eyes at the old guy and said, You are the Great Elder. What do you want me to do? I would say it's better to just wait for death. You can't beat him anyway. The Great Elder was a little embarrassed. Then he pretended to be calm and raised his head. He still hasn't figured out why these powerful men from the Ling sect suddenly came to the Shenyang sect and defeated Du Kanghai with a single sword blow. It stands to reason that he knows almost all the people who have enmity with Du Kanghai, but those guys have no ability to invite powerful people from the Lingmen. Therefore, the three people in front of them are probably just passing by the Shenyang sect. Then I happened to see a sect below, and I happened to see Du Kanghai unhappy. After all, according to the brutal character of the Ling sect disciples, it is very possible to do whatever they want and do whatever they want. The Great Elder nodded in his heart. There was no problem with this logic, and then he lowered his posture very low, and respectfully said to the woman in the snow skirt in midair, Our Shenyang sect is somewhat famous in the northern wasteland. If the three of you or I don't mind it, but you can come to my sect as a guest first. If you offend anything, I can correct it later. You can't beat it anyway. The Great Elder is vigilant. If something goes wrong, he will run away immediately. If the Shenyang sect is gone, he can start over again. If his life is gone, it will really be gone. The two men in black sneered, Trash sect. The Great Elder's face turned red, but he did not dare to refute. The woman in the snow skirt stood in the air, her cold and indifferent eyes scanning all the elders and peak masters below, and then she turned around indifferently. Let's go. The two men were stunned. Sister Lang, don't you say hello to the boss? No, he wants to play more. What fun is there in this place? The two of them were disdainful, and then suddenly thought of the little beauty next to Su Ming. They looked at each other tacitly, looked at the back of the woman in the snow skirt, and said with a smile, Lang's sister, are you jealous? The only one who can keep the boss in such a rubbish sect is the gentle village of the little beauty next to him. That's right, that kind of delicate and frail little girl makes people feel a strong desire for protection when looking at her. No wonder the boss is so happy that he doesn't even care about the affairs inside the door. After the two of them finished speaking, the woman in the snow skirt paused. Then, she tilted her head slightly, and her cold gaze fell on the two of them. Stop talking nonsense. While speaking, his cold eyes couldn't help but glance at a certain place below. His eyes were calm, but he snorted slightly in his heart. Then, in the stunned expressions of all the disciples of Shenyang sect, the three bodies merged into the space little by little and disappeared. Only Du Kanghai, covered in blood, was in the blood pit, and the cold and sharp spiritual power filled the air. The breath is the real proof that they have been here. All the elders swallowed, staring blankly at the place where the three people left. One of the elders reacted and quickly went down to check Du Kanghai's injuries. Under the willow tree, Su Ming stretched out comfortably and watched Du Kanghai being taken back to the main peak by the elders to heal his injuries. He smiled and touched Feng Qingling's smooth little face and joked, I don't know if it will happen again in the future. You won't be as obedient as you are today. Feng Qingling raised her head, her big black eyes looking straight at him. Su Ming stood up. Let's go. Looking at it like this, the sect master probably doesn't have any intention to care about my affairs anymore. As soon as he turned around, he saw Bai Qingshan standing not far behind him, staring at him with a pair of beautiful eyes, slightly cold. Master. Su Ming smiled slightly. Bai Qingshan glanced at Feng Qingling beside him and said coldly, "Do you know whose disciple she is?" Su Ming shook his head. "It doesn't matter to me who your disciple is." Bai Qingshan was furious. "How did I warn you before? Master's teachings must not be forgotten by the disciples." Su Ming shrugged, "But as a senior brother, it is your duty to help the little junior sister. If there is nothing wrong with the master, I will leave first." He took Feng Qingling away from here. Bai Qingshan stared at his back blankly. Su Ming's indifferent attitude towards her made her feel a little depressed. Deep in her heart, she became extremely sad at this moment. And after Bai Qingshan died, Hong Yu's beautiful eyes stared at the place where Su Ming and Feng Qingling left with interest, and finally glanced at Bai Qingshan's cold and pretty face, and raised her red lips. "Tisk, tisk, Peak Master Bai has a problem with my disciple, or do you have any objections to your disciples?" Bai Qingshan glanced at her coldly. "That disciple of yours was born with blocked spiritual veins. If he wants to practice, he must embark on evil cultivation. I don't know what your purpose is in letting her get close to Su Ming, but my disciple will never allow him to follow evil ways." Quote. Hong Yu sneered, "Crooked ways. Don't think too highly of yourself. Maybe in Su Ming's heart, you, the master, are nothing." After saying that, she ignored the changing expression on Bai Qingshan's pretty face and turned around to leave. Bai Qingshan bit her red lips. She is Su Ming's master, and she will never allow Su Ming and that Feng Qingling to get together. The other side, Hong Yu left from the mountainside of Kaifeng. Half an hour later, she arrived at Su Ming's residence. She saw Feng Qingling's petite figure on the grass not far ahead, holding a spirit pattern pen in one hand. The expression on her little face was extremely serious. She was obviously studying an obscure spirit pattern, which Su Ming should have taught her. Hong Yu glanced at the room behind her and felt Su Ming's aura inside, and she smiled charmingly. In a quiet room, Su Ming sat at the wooden table and took a sip of the tea he made. Without looking back, he exhaled softly. "Is something wrong?" Hong Yu's slender and charming figure quietly appeared behind him. A pair of jade hands gently placed on his shoulders and kneaded them gently. "I know your secret." She suddenly wrapped her hands around Su Ming's neck from behind, leaned over his ear, bit it lightly, then stared at him with her eyes, and blew seductively. "Brother Su, do you want it to be more exciting?" "Su Ming, your apprentice is still outside." Hong Yu rolled her eyes at him charmingly. She turned around, hooked her hands around Su Ming's neck, and straddled him with her legs. The sultry female body fragrance on her body spread into Su Ming's nose. Su Ming had no choice but to say, "Slow down." Hong Yu puffed her mouth. On her pair of hot and well-proportioned legs, under the seductive black dress, stockings of the same color were exposed. The stockings extended upward to reveal her well-proportioned calves without any fat. Her beautiful and slim body was just sitting on Su Ming's body. Under her dress was a hot and seductive slender waist. She looked at Su Ming infatuatedly. Her charming and soft red lips made people's hearts beat. Her beautiful eyes were looking forward to it. Her eyes were filled with waves, and her whole person was indescribably charming. Su Ming felt the softness and elasticity on his body that made him feel a little fascinated. He lowered his eyes and glanced at Hong Yu, then placed his palms on her soft waist. "Can you behave a little better?" In a dark room, Hong Yu pressed her whole body against Su Ming's body. Her eyes were as charming as silk, and she looked at him passionately. Her long eyelashes trembled. She blinked, stroking Su Ming's hair with her delicate hands, and spoke softly with her red lips. Fragrant, slowly approached him. The soft red lips were almost touching Su Ming's lips. Su Ming tilted his head and did not let her kiss him. Hong Yu was startled and stared at him with her beautiful eyes. "You won't kiss me?" Su Ming put his hand around her waist and stroked her gently. "Not now, Feng Qingling is outside." Hong Yu's eyes turned cold. "Then I'll kill her, and no one will get in the way." "Su Ming, don't be impulsive." He sighed softly in his heart and hugged Hong Yu's soft and sultry body in his arms. "Her physique is still useful to me." "You like her." "Dislike." "Then do you like me?" "Like." Hongyu changed into a comfortable position on Su-ming, buried her head in his arms, bumped his chest gently, then raised her head and looked at him with aggrieved eyes. Liar, it's been several months, after you come back, you won't be affectionate with me either. Don't forget that you were the one who flirted with me first. Did you just give up after all? Su-ming. He couldn't answer, because he was indeed the one who seduced Hongyu first. At that time, he was doing the villain mission of the system. If he wanted to quickly improve his cultivation and advance his physique, he could only achieve his goal through the ancient yin and yang dual cultivation method obtained from the system. It just so happened that Hongyu's evil cultivating physique was the perfect choice for him at that time. He didn't have much contact with her in the previous 5 lives. He only knew that Hongyu was exposed for his evil cultivator and died at the hands of the male protagonist. However, he never thought that this woman was not only extremely seductive, but also unusually entangled. Especially after Su-ming took possession of her innocent body through the yin and yang dual cultivation method. During that period, he would be pestered by her almost every day. Su-ming also thought about killing this woman after using her, but unfortunately he couldn't do it in the end. Even if he didn't like her, she would be a huge help for him on his rise, even if he was determined to do something in this life. A villain, he really can't be cruel to the woman who already belongs to him. The main reason is that I'm studying new techniques and physiques during this period, so I can't let my mind wander. Su-ming made nonsense without blushing. Hongyu used her green-white jade fingers to gently rub the center of his brow. I never thought that I would fall on a little man in this life. Small. Su-ming narrowed his eyes. Think about it carefully, is it small or not? Hongyu's cheeks turned red instantly. That's not what I said. Which one? She gritted her teeth and glared at Su-ming coquettishly. Believe it or not, I will pinch it right now. As he spoke, his palms reached down deftly. Su-ming hurriedly stopped her. Don't be impulsive. I surrender, sister. You get up first. Kiss me and I'll get up. Hongyu stared at him with burning eyes. I'm afraid that if we kiss each other, neither of us will be able to get up. Hongyu chuckled and pinched his chin with her jade hand. Just trust my self-control, little Susu. Little Susu. What the hell is this? Su-ming was helpless. Hongyu always gave him many nicknames, such as Brother Su, Brother Ming, Baby Su, Little Lovely Su. Now here comes another little Susu. She was originally a beautiful lady who was aloof and charming, but she became a cute and seductive little woman with Su-ming. Su-ming lowered his eyes and glanced at her soft and red lips. Finally, he slowly lowered his head and tasted the blush. Hongyu's eyes were filled with water. 2 jade hands hugged his head tightly, responding to him emotionally. A long time. Parted lips. Hongyu's face turned extremely rosy, and she couldn't get up because she was relying on Su-ming. I still want to. She looked at him with a smile. Su-ming, where is your self-control? As a woman, you would be a fool to believe it. Stop making trouble. Su-ming patted her smooth shoulder, put her down from his lap, poured a cup of tea, and drank it. Hongyu was dissatisfied and stood in front of him with her hands behind her back. Her exquisite curves were wrapped in a charming black dress. Under the hem of the skirt was a pair of long, alluring white legs. Is it still black and seductive today? Su-ming poured her a cup of tea. Drink some. Hongyu pursed her lips. I don't drink tea. Then, drink. Don't drink. Su-ming had a strange look on his face. You don't want to. Hongyu rolled her eyes at him. You think so? Last time, my knees were red for 3 days, but you just walked away. You didn't care about me at all. You even said you liked me. You're a liar. Su-ming smiled slightly. Then let me rub it for you. Hongyu looked up proudly, walked to Su-ming's bed, sat comfortably on his soft bed, and hummed softly. It's been so long, what's the use of rubbing now? Su-ming leaned back on the chair with a contented look on his face. You can make your knees red again. This time, I will definitely love you well. Hongyu spat at him lightly, and was about to retaliate when Chong's nose moved slightly. She grabbed the quilts stacked on the bed, put them to the tip of her nose and sniffed. Su-ming was funny, like a puppy. You can still laugh. Hongyu glared at him angrily. Why is there Feng Qingling's breath on your bed? Su-ming asked calmly. Didn't you already give her to me? Hongyu gritted his teeth. These are 2 different things, okay. I've known for a long time that you are a playboy, and you don't even let my disciples go. I don't know how many women there are out there. Su Ming felt helpless. Women are indeed unreasonable creatures. She wanted to give Feng Qingling to him yesterday, but she was so jealous today. It was simply incomprehensible. I'm not that hungry yet. Besides, Feng Qingling still has value, so I won't touch her in the short term. It should be said that he only regards Feng Qingling as a little sister in his heart. Indeed, Feng Qingling is still too young in his eyes. Even if he grows up in the future, he probably won't have much thoughts at that time. Then what are you going to do after taking advantage of her? I didn't think about it. Su Ming shook his head. Once her physique is completely awakened, the desire to kill in her heart will be infinitely amplified. At that time, her whole person will become extremely dangerous. It is estimated that even I am not her opponent. She will definitely it will give those hidden old monsters in the Northern Spirit Realm a headache. Do you want to use her to conquer the Northern Spirit Realm? Su Ming smiled mysteriously. A killing machine with huge potential, why not take advantage of it? Hong Yu pouted. I know you have bad intentions. No matter how you use her, you can't like her anyway. Don't be jealous. I'm not jealous. The woman who talks nonsense is talking about you. Also, from now on, don't let her enter your room, otherwise I will break her legs if I find out once. Can't you be nicer to her? You said you don't like her, are you feeling distressed? Su Ming stood up, walked to the bed, stretched out his hand to pinch Hong Yu's pretty face, then sat down next to her, leaning his back against the head of the bed. With a palm of his hand, Hong Yu's fragrant and soft body snuggled into his arms obediently. His head she placed it softly on his chest and blew into his neck from time to time. The refreshing fragrance lingered in Su Ming's heart. I told you that she still has value, don't let you destroy her. Su Ming smoothed Hong Yu's soft hair with his palms and said softly, don't you know what kind of woman I like? A little girl like her is far behind you. Hong Yu raised her head in his arms and looked at him with a smile. Every time, she only talks about coaxing me, but doesn't take any actual actions. Practical actions. Su Ming smiled evilly. Actually, I can not only coax you with words, but I can also do other things. It's annoying. Hong Yu punched him lightly. Don't move, let me hug him for a while. Sister, it's you who's moving. Hong Yu. Bite him hard on the shoulder. Su Ming held her head with his hand and said tentatively, the shoulders are a bit hard, how about we try somewhere else? Hong Yu's cheeks are red. Don't think she doesn't know what this guy means. He just likes to be passive and doesn't take the initiative at all. Sometimes Hong Yu even wonders whether this bad guy likes her in his heart, but every time he is beaten by him after being left out, he always had a reason to coax her back, making her love and hate him at the same time. Did you do what you did today? After being gentle for a while, Hong Yu suddenly asked. What's up? Stop pretending. Du Kanghai just came to trouble you, and his arms were cut off. Don't tell me it wasn't you. Su Ming smiled and said, as long as the woman is beautiful, why are you so smart? I just want to teach that old guy a lesson. After a while, you can kill him. Hong Yu's willow eyebrows stretched. Du Kanghai is considered useless. Among the Shenyang sect, only the great elder Qi Yuan is still a bit of a threat. When I take over Tianfang, I will help you find what you want. Not urgent. Su Ming kissed her smooth forehead and said, just practice hard and don't worry about other things. Yes. Hong Yu nodded obediently, bit the corner of his lips, and said softly and seductively, go to my place tonight. Su Ming. He shook his head and said righteously, I haven't been able to do it recently. It hurts my body. I have to restrain myself. Hong Yu glared at him. It's been several months. Su Ming was unmoved. I'm too tired and don't want to move. I don't want you to move. Su Ming. What kind of tiger and wolf words is this? He spread his palms, and a red spirit fruit exuding a strong aura of spiritual power appeared in his hand. A powerful energy surged out of his palm, compressing the spirit fruit into a ball of pure spiritual power. Then, with his fingers on Hong Yu's tender a gentle touch on the lips, open your mouth. Hong Yu glanced up at him and said deliberately, that's how you lied to me last time. Your food is not delicious at all, it tastes weird. Su Ming. He held Hong Yu's chin with one hand, and with the latter's resentful expression, he gently introduced the pure spiritual power transformed from the Hongling sacred fruit into her mouth. What's this? Hong Yu felt a warm current surging through her body. The spiritual power contained in her spiritual veins began to surge crazily at this moment. After a while, her cultivation level was raised to the level of spirit master. Middle period. Su Ming smiled mysteriously. Of course it's a good thing, but will it poison you? Hongyu hugged him tightly, pressed into his arms, and hummed softly, you can't say for sure. Maybe one day you won't like me, and you'll kick me away mercilessly, and then run away with other women. Come on, leave me alone here to feel sad, and maybe you will even kill me to silence me. Su Ming scratched her nose and said, it's a good idea. I can try it in the future. How dare you? Hongyu glared at him, if you dare to abandon me, I will dare to find another man. Su Ming narrowed his eyes. Press back. I'll give you another chance, think it through before you speak. Su Ming's young and charming face was reflected in Hongyu's moist eyes. She smiled softly, and then breathed out softly, be gentle. Quote. Half an hour later, the main hall of Shenyan sect. The atmosphere in the palace was extremely silent. Du Kanghai was lying on a bed at the back of the hall. With his arms broken, his breath was sluggish, and the blood on his face had been wiped clean. However, his old face was full of pain, and his eyes contained endless resentment and hatred. Hate. He still hasn't figured it out yet. Why would the strong men from the spirit sect of the central continent come to trouble him? From the beginning, he never thought of Su Ming in this matter. After all, in his eyes, Su Ming was just a junior, a mere disciple of the Nirvana realm. It's not worth Lingman's huge efforts to help him. The more I couldn't figure it out, the more stuffy I became, the blood rushed to my heart, and I spit out a mouthful of blood. Outside in the palace, the great elder Qi Yuan sat at the top of the table, and his face was also very ugly. Du Kanghai was severely damaged. Their Shenyan sect originally had 3 powerful spiritual masters, but one of their top combat power was suddenly reduced. He was afraid that the others and Shenyan Zong had a grudge, and the forces that Du Kanghai had offended before came to trouble them after receiving the news. Well, Qi Yuan sighed heavily in his heart. After all, the one who attacked Du Kanghai was the Ling sect, which was very famous in the central continent. As a demon cultivator sect, their disciples do whatever they want. With the current strength of the Shenyan sect, wanting to avenge Du Kangzi was almost a fantasy, and they had no choice but to break their teeth and swallow it. Looking around, he found that almost all the elders and peak masters had gathered here. Except for Bai Qingshan from Kaifeng and the elder Hongyu who was not here, everyone else was here. Qi Yuan took a deep breath and took the lead to say in a solemn voice, the sect leader is seriously injured. Everyone must block the news and never reveal it to the outside world. The All Souls Festival in Wangcheng is about to begin. If other forces know that the sect leader is in trouble, our Shenyan sect will once, you really have to be inferior to others, and maybe you will be kicked out of the 5 major sects. Everyone below had complicated expressions. The 10,000 Spirits Festival is a top event that occurs once every 10 years in which Wangcheng redistributes resources and territory to all the forces in the northern wasteland. It is also a competition opportunity that gives all sect forces a re-ranking opportunity once every 10 years. If it is deprived of the title of the 5 major sects this time, the Shenyan sect will never recover from the fall. Even if it wants to regain the title of the 5 major sects, it will be 10 years later. Qi Yuan said coldly, we are here to discuss the important matters of the sect. Why doesn't Elder Hongyu come? All the elders looked at each other. Several young male elders hurriedly spoke up and put in good words for Hongyu. First elder, please calm down. Elder Hongyu may have something to deal with, and he may come later. As the voices of several people fell, outside the main hall, a graceful figure appeared. Hongyu put on a red dress again, with her black hair tied up. Her charming and delicate face was smoother and rosier than usual, but her eyes were cold and indifferent. She glanced at the people in the hall, and then he walked to his seat and sat down. Great elder, what do you want from me? Qi Yuan said with a dark face, Elder Hongyu, the sect leader is seriously injured. From now on, all matters of the sect will be decided by me. I may need to trouble you to guard Tianfang for me. Hongyu said nothing. Some of the young elders and the other male peak masters around were looking at her secretly. These people couldn't help but stare at her exquisite body, with her fair and jade-like skin reflected in their eyes. After swallowing, his vision gradually became intense. Hongyu has a charming appearance and an extremely perfect figure. She is a charming beauty. She is also quite mysterious in the Shenyun sect. She usually does not like to show her face. Except for the sect leader and a few elders, everyone else is very I can rarely see her. When she first came to the sect, many elders and peak leaders who thought they were outstanding wanted to pursue her. Unfortunately, she rarely showed up in the sect and did not give others any chance. Of course, at Hongyu's age, he can advance to the Spirit Master realm, and his talent surpasses that of many geniuses in the northern wilderness region. His vision is naturally extremely high. How can these elders and peak masters of the Shenyun sect do this? Being favored by her. Except for that unreasonable little villain. Qi Yuan and several elders began to discuss the deployment of the sect's barrier. In the past, the sect's formation was controlled by Du Kanghai. Now that he has lost his arms, it is natural to replace him. As for the matter of the sect's formation, it has little to do with the peak masters of each peak. Hongyu obviously has no interest in it, and Qi Yuan dare not talk about her anymore. After all, in the sect now, apart from him and Du Kanghai, Hongyu is the only one. The only person who has advanced to the spiritual realm. Of course, Du Kanghai is already dead. Therefore, only he and Hongyu were left. Zhang Ting, the leader of the first peak, saw that Qi Yuan and others did not notice this, so he quietly stood up, poured a cup of spiritual tea, and sent it to Hongyu. Elder Hongyu, this is the spiritual tea treasured by my Zhang family. It can not only warm and nourish spiritual power, but also has many benefits for the body. Try drinking it. If you like it, I will send some to you later. When chasing women, of course you have to be thick-skinned. Zhang Ting has been attracted to Hongyu since she first entered the sect. He is 29 years old this year, and his cultivation is at the peak of the Nirvana realm. He will be promoted to the Spirit Master in the near future, so his talent is naturally not bad. In addition, he was a child of the Zhang family in Wangcheng. Although his status in the Zhang family was not high, no one dared to look down upon him after he came to the Shenyun sect. Zhang Ting smiled warmly. What man wouldn't want to show his best side when chasing a girl? Under the strange looks of several peak masters around him, he handed the Xuanjing teacup in front of Hongyu. Staring at Hongyu's charming and delicate face, he thought to himself that according to his status, with the Zhang family behind him, he was the one with the highest status among all the elders and peak masters. Others were not qualified to follow him. He fights. Hongyu raised her eyes and glanced at him. She did not reach out to take it. Instead, she looked at Qi Yuan's place and said lightly, the sect leader is injured, and Elder Qi Yuan has a heavy burden on him. You can give him this tea, I'm not interested. Hear the words. The other peak masters sneered at Zhang Ting inwardly. Although they had not had much contact with Hongyu, they had already guessed that this elder Hongyu was not so easy to chase. Zhang Ting was also a little embarrassed. Then he suddenly remembered something and said bravely, you have just been promoted to Spirit Master, and your cultivation level must not be stable yet. The Dragon and Phoenix Tower in Wangcheng will open in a few days, and my Zhang family has some skills in the Dragon and Phoenix Tower. To save face, I can accompany you to auction some spiritual objects that can stabilize your cultivation. Hongyu originally didn't intend to pay attention to him, but when she saw this man kept pestering her, her eyes turned slightly cold, and a domineering and terrifying spiritual power suddenly surged out of her body. Click. Zhang Ting's expression suddenly changed, and the Xuanjing teacup in his hand exploded, and the tea inside spilled all over him. Elder Hongyu. Qi Yuan noticed what had happened here and turned his head and shouted softly. Zhang Ting took 2 awkward steps back and wiped the water stains on his body. He stared at Hongyu's cheek and softly apologized to Hongyu. Deep in his heart, there was a deep resentment welling up. Wait until the day you fall into my hands, let's see if I can kill you. The episode passed. Qi Yuan reassigned the sect's tasks. The mission of the Peak Master remains unchanged. It is still to manage the disciples of each peak and calm the emotions of these disciples. As for the elders, they also have their own tasks. Anyway, this time, Qi Yuan enjoyed the feeling of being the leader of the sect. But this time, in the sky above the main peak of the Shenyun sect, a man in green with a long sword on his back broke through the spiritual formation barrier outside the Shenyun sect, and his body slowly descended from the sky and stood outside the main hall. Jian Yang, the chief disciple of the Xuantian sword sect, came to pay homage to the sect on the orders of his master. A majestic voice mixed with spiritual power spread through the hall. The young man stepped into the hall with a long sword on his back, a proud smile on his rather handsome face. Zhanyang. The elders and peak masters in the hall were stunned for a moment. After reacting, they looked at the young man who walked in with an arrogant look. They were stunned for a moment, and an elder murmured, "He is the chief disciple with the most outstanding talent in the Xuantian sword sect in the past 100 years. It is said that he has already advanced to the Spirit Master realm at the age of less than 30. Although he is not as good as the real geniuses of the Northern Spirit realm, among us the Northern Wilderness Territory is also a real top-level monster." Xuantian sword sect, like Shenyang sect, is one of the 5 major sects in the Northern Wasteland, but one is in the north and the other is in the south. As for the chief disciple of this sword sect, Qi Yuan naturally knows him. In the Xuantian sword sect, there were originally only 3 powerful spirit masters. Ever since Zhanyang broke through and advanced to the Spirit Master level, the Sword Sect's top combat power could almost completely crush their Shenyang sect. Zhanyang walked into the main hall. Qi Yuan raised his head and looked at him. "I wonder why Zhanyang's eldest nephew came to our Shenyang sect." He had some friendship with the head of the Xuantian sword sect, who was also the master of Zhanyang, so the name, nephew, was quite smooth. Zhanyang glanced at the people in the hall and glanced at everyone. However, when his eyes fell on Hongyu's rather lazy and pretty face, his expression changed and he stared at her deeply. Then he looked away and looked at Qi Yuan. "My master used the Xuantian mirror's induction to learn that several powerful auras suddenly appeared here in Shenyang sect, so he specially asked me to check it out." Zhanyang's voice deepened. "When I entered the sect just now, I saw that all the disciples looked panicked and their breaths were unstable. They were obviously frightened. I don't know the Shenyang sect, but what happened? Where is sect leader Du?" Qi Yuan shook his head. "My eldest nephew is worrying too much. Nothing has happened to our Shenyang sect. The sect competition is coming soon. It is normal for the disciples to be a little anxious. As for our sect master, he is currently practicing in seclusion at Tianfang. It won't be long before I can break through to the peak of the spiritual realm." "Really?" Zhanyang stared straight at Qi Yuan. Qi Yuan smiled slightly. "My eldest nephew has come all the way, why don't you stay in my sect for a few more days?" Zhanyang shook his head. "Since there is nothing else, I have to go back and resume my life with master. However, besides this matter, I have to deal with a personal matter when I come here today." "Private matter?" Many elders and peak leaders looked at him doubtfully. Zhanyang turned his attention to Hongyu again and raised the corner of his mouth. "I have been looking for you for so long, but I didn't expect that you would be hiding in Shenyang sect. If master hadn't used the Xuantian mirror to sense your aura, how long would you have wanted to hide?" Hongyu stood up and said, "You don't need to worry about my affairs." Zhanyang sneered, "I am your senior brother, tell me whether I should care or not." At this point, his eyes darkened. "Master said that if you go back with me now, he can forget about the past. If not, no force here will dare to take you in the future. And the disciple you brought out. Her physique plays a vital role in master's breakthrough to the spirit master. Where did you hide her?" Qi Yuan and others were a little confused. Zhanyang, the chief disciple of the Xuantian sword sect, is actually Hongyu's senior brother. Could it be that Hongyu was also a member of the Xuantian sword sect before? I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.